Welcome to the award-winning Superhuman Academy podcast, where we interview extraordinary people to give you the skills and strategies to overcome the impossible. And now, here's your host, Jonathan Levi.
Before we get started, I want to ask you, what would it mean for you to be able to double or even triple your memory and ability to learn? So many people tell us that this skill would be absolutely life-changing for them, but they just don't have the time. They just don't have the time. So that's why we have developed, my team and I, a 5-day memory mastery crash course where we go into all the fundamental neuroscience and the actual techniques that are used by the world's best memory athletes and world record holders. It's a course that we value at $97, but here's the thing. We are actually giving this course away completely for free. All you have to do to enroll in the course is visit jle.vi/5. That's jle.vi/5. Greetings, SuperFriends, and welcome to this week's episode where we are joined by an Olympian and half marathon record holder, Ryan Hall. He is a recently published author of Run the Mile You're In, a story about how he found his way from a self-proclaimed lousy runner to being a record holder and 2-time Olympian. He then made the transition from a runner to a quite accomplished weightlifter, and we talked a little bit about that story. We talked about the mindset and mentality that it takes to get to the level of performance that Ryan achieved. We talked a little bit about his charity work, and we talked about his advice for getting your body into peak performance states. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I know you will too. So without any further ado, my new super friend, Mr. Ryan Hall. Mr. Ryan Hall, welcome to the show, my friend. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, Jonathan.
It's a real pleasure. It's not every day. I think you're only the second Olympian to be on the show ever, so I'm really excited to chat.
Oh, cool. Who was the first? I'm curious.
You know, I'm going to embarrass myself now and say I honestly don't remember his name right now. I remember his face. I remember what we talked about. But of course, you know, when the memory expert forgets the names, it's quite embarrassing. Ryan, I tried to cover in the intro your story, but you bounced around and you have a really interesting story. So I would love to hear you tell it. I mean, when people ask you at cocktail parties, what do you do? What's the answer?
That's like a really confusing question for me to answer, actually, especially when not so much now that I'm retired from professional running, but, you know, to the everyday person, you're sitting on an airplane, maybe talking like, hey, what do you do? And you're like, I'm a professional runner. And they're like, what's a professional runner? Like, you know, they have no idea. So, yeah, like my job is I was a sponsored athlete, sponsored by multiple companies, but ASICS was kind of my primary sponsor from 2005 when I graduated Stanford all the way till I retired in 2016. So I spent 20 years. I started running when I was 13 years old, and I spent 20 years trying to develop my talent. And I was just really curious to see like all that God had put inside me, all the talent they'd put inside me, because I did have a natural ability at a young age that I knew at the age of 13. But I was really curious just to see what it would be and how far I could get and how fast I could run. And so it was quite an adventure, you know, going on that path of trying to cultivate my talent, trying to draw out the best of me athletically.
Wow. And so what happened? Where did it take you?
So, well, maybe I should just start from the beginning. You know, like I grew up in Southern California and I used to hate to run, and maybe a lot of your listeners can relate to that. I actually still don't really like running. I loved running when I was like going after it. Like it was my passion, my drive. I loved it. But now like I transitioned out of it and I'm kind of like an all in or all out kind of guy. And so now, like, I hardly run at all. But at that time, hated to run. One, play pro baseball. And then I was traveling down to a basketball game in 8th grade. I was 5 foot tall, 100 pounds. And as you can imagine, that's not like the ideal frame for a basketball player. So I wasn't seeing a lot of playing time on the court. And it felt like as I was looking out over Big Bear Lake and 15 miles around the lake, I felt like I was just kind of planting this little desire in me to try and run around the lake. And I'm so glad that I decided to answer that challenge. I went home and told my dad what I wanted to do. And he's like, all right, if that's what you want to do, let's do it. But we're going to do it together. And like, how amazing of a response is that? You know, like as a dad of 4 girls now, like if they come home to me at the age of 13, they're like, hey, I've never run before. I want to try and run 15 miles around the lake. I would have been like, let's start with like 2 or 3 miles, you know, like something more manageable. But my dad, he's just like, no, if that's what you want to do, let's go do it. So we went out on a very, very painful, long run around the lake. It took hours and hours. Felt like I was out there for days. My feet were all blistered up afterwards because I was wearing basketball shoes. But I remember stumbling through the front door and feeling like God had told me, and just in my heart, that I was going to one day run with the best guys in the world, but I'd been given that gift so I could help other people. So really that was kind of the vision. And I wrote about that in the first chapter of my book. And on that vision, I fell back on that over and over and over again. Because I remember when I was at that age, just beginning training, doing these hill sprints out in Big Bear, and it was like evening time, and the snow was kind of just lightly coming down, like those big old flakes that come down all slow. And I remember having this thought, like, what is it going to take for me to run with the best guys in the world? Like, I didn't know any Olympians. I'd never talked to any Olympians. You know, social media wasn't going, like internet was just popping up. So we didn't have access to all the information and podcasts and stuff like that we have now. And so I was super curious, like, what is it going to take for me to get there? And, I spent the next 20 years learning what it does take. But one of the major things I learned is that it just takes getting back up over and over and over again after disappointment after disappointment after disappointment. Like, I had so many more bad races than good races. I was telling someone the other day, I probably had 12 runs, like races and runs together, that were like those days where everything's just clicking and you feel like you're in heaven and you're just gobbling up the ground. It's effortless, like 12 of them in like 20 years, you know. But I wouldn't want it the other way around. You know, I wouldn't want to experience those every single day, because like we get used to beauty and then it stops being as beautiful if we're just staring at beauty like all the time. You know, it's like sometimes we have to remind ourselves, like, oh, it's not always like this. You know, it's having those tough moments that make the really amazing moments all worth it. So, you know, fast forward, went to Stanford and had an up and down career there. And then it was in 2007 when I think for the first time I realized that I was running with the best guys in the world. It was the Houston Half Marathon. It was actually my first half marathon. And at the time, the American record was somewhere around, I believe, 60 minutes and 40 seconds, or maybe 61 something. I don't remember exactly, but it had been standing for about 20 years. And I went into that race feeling amazing, like everything was clicking in training. I knew something special was going to happen. I had no idea how fast I was going to run, though. I wasn't necessarily trying to break an hour in the half marathon. And it's one of those races where I'm so glad that I've learned to pay attention to my body more than data. And that's really, I think, important for us to remember in today's day and age when, you know, we all have GPS watches, or at least, you know, most people are really into endurance sports do. And you always know what pace you're at, you know, what your heart rate is, you know, your cadence, like all this stuff. And sometimes I feel like I could get bogged down with numbers, you know. So my first mile of that race was 4:37, and I was faster than I thought I should have been running. But then physically, like, I went back into my mind's eye and I just asked myself this question: if I was in training and I was doing an hour tempo run, could I sustain this effort for an hour? And the answer was yes. And even the answer was yes, and I could do more. And so I actually increased the pace after that first mile and ended up running entirely on my own the whole way that day, an average 4:33 per mile, and set the American record in the half marathon. And at the time, that was one of the top 10 performances of all time over the half marathon distance. So now it's kind of more custom to see guys breaking an hour. But yeah, at the time, 59:43 was one of the best times ever run. And it was kind of the moment when I was like, yeah, I'm now living in that vision that I had when I was 13.
Incredible. What does it take to get there, Ryan?
Well, getting back up over and over again is a big part of it. I mean, there's all these pieces, right? It's like hard. It can't just be like you have to address the physical, but then you also have to address what's going on in your mind and heart. And then you also got to address like the emotions that you're experiencing all along the way. It's like you have to manage like all these different aspects of what makes you you. Because what I've found in running is it's not just like an isolated hobby on the side. It's like, if your goal is to become like, see how fast you can get, it's an entire lifestyle change. I remember going to a Boston Red Sox game. I got to throw out a first pitch there before I ran my first Boston Marathon. And I remember walking past all the players' cars there, and I swear, like every single car had a box of Dunkin' Donuts on the dash of their car, you know? And I was like, wow, like that is just like, I can't imagine like pounding some donuts before my race, you know, like you can't do that and maximize your potential in running. So it's all encompassing. But I would say, you know, speaking to the physical, I'm just continually amazed of the power of consistency. And I tell people all the time, like consistency can either be your greatest ally if you're consistently doing the things that you need to do to get you to where you want to go, or it can be your greatest enemy, you know, if you're consistently not doing the things that you need to do. So I think putting consistency in your corner and being like, my approach to running is like, I'm going to get out the door every day. Because I know sometimes if I don't want to get out the door, it's just like a lack of motivation, or I don't feel like it, and I need to start moving to see what happens. And then once I'm out there moving and running, then you make assessments. You're like, okay, my body's really tired today. Maybe I should switch up my workout or go easier. And I was actually really bad at listening to my body. There's a whole chapter in my book about partnering with your body. I think that's a really important aspect of achieving your maximum potential. So yeah, consistency, it's just huge. And I see it now with my daughter. So my wife and I, and we might get into this a little bit deeper later on, but 3.5 years ago, we brought home our daughters from Ethiopia. We adopted 4 sisters. At the time, their ages 5, 8, 12, and 15. And, you know, they were in really bad physical shape, not because they were being like mistreated in the orphanage or anything, but more for their own safety. They had to stay in the orphanage, and the orphanage is essentially just a house with a driveway. So for 3 years, you know, they're not getting a whole lot of physical activity. And also, you know, in their culture, being really skinny is not necessarily seen as a positive. It's seen as kind of a health risk. So, you know, they were feeding them quite a bit of food, and it's pretty heavy food that has quite a bit. It tastes amazing, but has quite a bit of fat in it. And so, you know, they'd put on quite a bit of weight. My oldest daughter, Hannah, she actually weighed more than I did when we picked her up from the orphanage, and she's 15 and 5'2", and I'm 5'10" and a professional runner. So I am light. I'm like 140 pounds, 138 pounds, somewhere in there. But she was far from being, you know, like those small framed African runners, Ethiopian runners that you see running in the Boston Marathon, New York City Marathon. That was not her, you know, and she couldn't even run one lap around a track. Like she could finish one lap, but that was it. She was like tapped out after that. But she had an appreciation for running, and we were first just trying to get them moving, just to get their muscles kind of turned back on. There was a lot of atrophy that was going on. And so it was just, you know, consistently getting out there. First, just starting with walks and then little jogs here and there. And then, you know, we're just gradually kind of running more and more. And she really wanted to be a good runner. So we just gradually, you know, we're working from where she was at and trying to build a bridge to where she wanted to get to. And it was a very slow, gradual process. And now fast forward 3.5 years later, she won the state title here in Arizona in cross country for her division, qualified for Nike Nationals, has run 10:43 for 2 miles, and is trying to break 5 minutes for the mile. So
Wow.
It's just the power of consistency, you know, and it doesn't like, because I think it's easy for people maybe to look at me and be like, yeah, like you were good when you started, and yeah, you got a lot better, but like I can't relate to that. Like I'm not good at this. I'm overweight. And that's why I like to share Hannah's story, because she overcame all those things just through the power of consistency.
It's incredible. Good for you. And what a massive takeaway. Like really consistency. I love what you said about it being your best friend or your worst enemy and needing to make that choice because we are what we repeatedly do. One of the things I love about what Ben Hardy teaches is signaling. Our brains assess our identity not by who we believe we are, but by our actions. That's how we read who we believe we really are. And we are who we believe we are. We become who we believe we are. So if you consistently show up to the gym, all of a sudden you start believing, I'm a really disciplined person. I did want to ask you, speaking of like the discipline, what percentage, because as you said, you were physically gifted and you wanted to see how far you'd been physically gifted, but what percentage of what you achieved is physical and what percentage is mental, the tenacity, the grit, the discipline?
Ooh, that's a good question. It's hard to ballpark that one. My dad used to tell me this. He's like, anyone can be a good runner, but not everyone can be a great runner. Like to be a great runner, it does require a certain amount of talent. I feel like I see a lot of guys coming out of college that are equally, if not more talented than I am. So I wouldn't say I had an extraordinary level of talent. Say I had a decent amount. So I would say for myself personally, probably a greater percentage, maybe 60 or 70% came from the work ethic and the discipline and putting myself out there and just never giving up on my dream, always coming back to it. But I experienced that now with weightlifting. I transitioned to weightlifting after I retired from professional running 3 years ago. And I was super, super weak. Like I said, like 140 pounds. And I could maybe like deadlift, bench, and squat my body weight. Maybe like I would struggle to do that. So I had nowhere to go but up. And so obviously like the amount of like physical talent I have as a weightlifter is very low. And so like, no matter how hard I train, like I know in my heart, like I'm never going to be deadlifting 1,000 pounds like some of these power lifters are doing nowadays. Like it's just not in the genetic cards for me. So there is a genetic component that I think we need to be aware of, and it can discourage us if we think, oh, there's no genetic component. It's just all like nurture, all like how you train, all about lifestyle, and you can get as high as you want. Like I think you're kind of not getting a full picture of what it takes to get to where you want to get to. And you're just going to end up disappointed. You're going to be frustrated with yourself. Whereas for me, like accepting that I'm never going to deadlift 1,000 pounds, it makes it okay for me to have a PR of 405 and not be feeling bad about that and be like, no, that's actually really good for me. And so
right.
I think for listeners, like what I like to tell them is, I have a different view of competition. It's not about how do you stack up to other people. It's about developing your own personal excellence and seeing how good at this thing that you're doing, how good you can get. It's not about comparing yourself to other people, but that is easier said than done for sure. Like I struggle with that one, something I have to cultivate constantly because you get on Instagram, you're following people and you're like, man, they're so good. It's so hard to not compare, but I feel like it's a huge, huge killjoy to do that.
Oh yeah, don't get me started on Instagram. I feel like Instagram is where people go to feel shitty about themselves. We just don't realize it yet. Noah Kagan on the show said something that's actually stuck with me, and I've repeated it many, many times to people. It's like, when you pick up that device and you use app X, do you feel better or do you feel worse? When I pick up the TEDx app or TED and I watch a TED talk, I feel better. When I pick up FaceTime and I call a loved one abroad, I feel better. When I pick up Instagram, I always feel worse about myself. And it's exactly what you said, because Instagram is a platform for comparing yourself to others, in my opinion. Right. And I have very strong negative views of that for the psyche.
Yeah. That's a great question to ask yourself after hopping on Instagram or Twitter or whatever. Do you feel better? I love that.
Yeah. And I do want to touch on what you said about genetics, because I think, as we're learning more and more about epigenetics, we're learning that there is gene expression and you have a say in what happens in your genes. But it's like, because of epigenetics, you spent from age 13 onward, telling your body, go this way in the gene expression pathway, make me light, make me fast. And you can't reverse course on that. It's like, maybe if at age 13, you'd said, I want to be the world's best power lifter, you could have influenced the development of your gene expression, but it's not going to happen at this point,
Right. And you can still, though, like make gains, it's like I agree, like you definitely shift like genetics and even like muscle fibers and stuff like that a certain way based on when you develop what you're into and what you're doing. But it's like for me, like being a marathon runner, you wouldn't think that like I could get my deadlift over 400 and my bench over 300 and my squat almost up to 400 now, so you can still like get a lot out of yourself, even if you come to it later in life. And I don't know about like if you can switch them over or not, but you can still nurture that. But yeah, you're not going to get to the same level if you haven't been doing that from kind of your youth up. I agree.
Absolutely. This episode is brought to you by Ambronite. Ambronite's plant-based meal replacement shakes are made of 100% real foods. They have everything you need and contain zero preservatives, GMOs, or artificial BS. I recently got a shipment of Ambronite, and I have to say, I am pretty impressed. The product blends ridiculously well. It tastes great, not too sweet, and not like grass clippings either. And it actually keeps me satiated for 4+ hours. So this is one product that I will be carrying in my travel bag, putting in my desks, and placing in my kitchen cabinet. Now, to go ahead and get 10% off of Ambronite's complete meal and balanced meal shakes, visit ambronite.com/superhuman and make sure to use the coupon code superhuman at checkout. That's AMBRONITE.com/superhuman and use coupon code superhuman at checkout. What motivated you to make the switch from running to weightlifting? I mean, to walk me through the decision there.
Yeah, it was totally like opposite extremes, but really it came down to this. So when I retired from professional running, I went from the 2012 Olympic Games in London, where I dropped out with upper hamstring injury. That was kind of the beginning of a cascade of injuries. And after I got through those injuries, after a couple year period of just injury after injury after injury, then I started really struggling with this kind of like extreme fatigue. And I think a lot of that, to be honest, came down to, talking about like genetics and stuff like that. Like, I think I'm naturally, if I wasn't into weightlifting, I think I'd sit around 160 pounds. And with the running, I had to get down to 138 pounds. And then I kind of bought into this lie of like lighter's better, and it's very hard to not do that because until you try, you really don't know, And so I was trying to get lighter and lighter and lighter. I ended up getting down to 127 pounds, and I was terrible at that weight. Like, I had girls beating me, not to speak poorly of girls, but usually that doesn't happen to professional men runners, So it was this thing of like, running is so catabolic. It just strips you down of everything you don't need except for what you need to run. And I'm talking about like at the extreme that we do it. I think there's a lot. You can find a healthy level and you can run a decent amount and not have that be true for you. But for me, running 100 to 120 to sometimes 140 miles a week, it just strips you down. Like, I don't care like how much you eat. Like, my goal was always to eat like as much food as I could. And I was still just getting lighter and lighter and lighter. So what I'd have to do typically, and I saw this as like a character flaw and like a huge downfall when I was going through it. It was after every marathon, I'd take 2 weeks off. And during that time, I'd go from like really strict on my diet to like donut eating competition, like just eating like as much food, whatever I want, junk, and doing like no physical activity at all. And during that time, I'd literally like put on 10 pounds in like 2 weeks. And, I felt terrible on the inside about that. Like, I always felt like I was like shooting myself in the foot. And I felt like, it was a lack of self-discipline. I was all disappointed in myself. But every single time I did that, 6 months later, I would have a great marathon. And then later on in my career, I kind of developed some more discipline, and I was like, hey, let me try not doing that and just eating like well and healthy and not putting on the weight. And so I'd do that. But then I just kept getting lighter and lighter, and then my next marathon would be terrible. So I probably tried that half a dozen times where I didn't put on weight in the off season, and every single time I had a terrible marathon or didn't make it to the start line because I was really fatigued. So all this to say, like, my body gave me quite a bit over a 20-year period and been kind of stripped down of a lot of nutrients, muscle, strength. And I tell people, like, it wasn't a balanced lifestyle. And I think it's very hard and maybe even impossible to be one of the best guys in the world at running and be like healthy, like every time I had my testosterone measured, it was clinically low every time. And, there was nothing I could do about that because we're in a drug testing pool. So I can't take testosterone.
So you're sacrificing your health effectively.
Right.
Like to be an average citizen at your peak health, if you had low T, you'd probably go to the doctor. Just so I understand correctly, you'd go to the doctor and say, hey, I need some help. I have low T, which can cause all kinds of problems for men with mood and energy levels. And I've never thought about that actually these people that we hold up as athletes as like the epitome of health are actually making some serious. I mean, I know with women, like female Olympians, depending on their body fat percentage, actually don't menstruate many times.
Yeah.
But with the men, thinking about that.
Yeah. So, my body had just been kind of put through the ringer, and eventually it was kind of like, I've given you everything I can. There's nothing left. Like, it's time for you to get back to me, was kind of how I was feeling my body was communicating to me. So when I retired, I used to hate lifting weights, but I knew I needed to push myself physically because that's just who I am. Like, I love pushing myself. That was one of my favorite parts about running. And so I got into the weight room and I was terrible. I remember walking around the weight room and having a hat on, pulling it down low, like trying not to make eye contact with anyone because I was just this frail, like 138-pound dude trying to bench press like 90 pounds, like I was super, super embarrassed. But it was exactly what my body needed. And so I stopped running like completely. I do a couple of runs here and there just to keep my wife company, but pretty much stopped running completely, started eating a lot more food, replenishing my body, put on a lot of weight really quickly. Most of that was muscle, not all of it. I definitely am not as lean as I used to be as a runner, but I can still see my abs, so I'm happy. So, my body was just kind of like saturating and like eating up all this, like giving back to it. And I found my energy levels totally came back because when I was a professional runner, I always told people like I felt great when I was running, but then the rest of the day I kind of felt like a zombie and I had to sleep like 10 hours a night. I had to take 2-hour naps every afternoon. Like you're just like physically exhausted like all the time. And so I knew I didn't want to have that lifestyle anymore. Like I wanted to have energy. I wanted to be able to make it through afternoon without taking a nap. So with the weightlifting, it fills me up. It gives me energy. After I'm in the weight room, I get all wired afterwards and I'm like super fun to be around with my kids and my wife and stuff. Whereas I go for a long run, I come back and I just feel like taking a nap, So it was a really kind of healthy transition for me. And like I said, like if your thing is like a combination of weightlifting and endurance activity, I think you can find a healthy level. My goal was not to find a healthy level of training. My goal was to see how good I could get. And to do that, you gotta be right at the threshold of overtraining. And sometimes you even have to cross over to see where that threshold is. And it's just the cost that you have to pay to see how good you can get.
Now, Ryan, you've sacrificed a pretty significant amount of time with your family and in the weight room and running to write a book. Tell me about that. I mean, what is it that you're hoping that people will learn from your experience?
Yeah, like going back to what I was talking about with the 13-year-old self, like thinking about what is it going to take. Like it was a pleasure for me to, after my running career ended, and it's actually after I did this crazy challenge. I'd retired from professional running, got into weightlifting, put on like 30 to 40 pounds, and then signed up for this crazy world marathon challenge. I don't know if you've heard about this, but 7 marathons in 7 days on 7 continents.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a full week for sure. But the thing is, I didn't like to run at that point. So I don't know. Like I did have my reasons for why I signed up. A large part of that was I was supporting the Dream Center in Los Angeles, which is this amazing church doing amazing work. But also part of it too is I just wanted to it's like the trip of a lifetime, right? It's like we ran our first marathon in Antarctica, and so the cover shot from my book is me running a marathon in Antarctica. It's the first of the 7, but I didn't even train for that. And my longest run leading up to that in the last 4 months, 6 months before that was 8 miles. And I was maybe running 3 days a week. And it was probably, if I was hitting 20 miles a week, that was good for me. I was in the weight room every day just training, but I didn't want to train for it. I was like, I can just, muscle through it and get through these marathons. And I was right to some extent. It was actually really interesting. I was actually getting in better shape as the week was going on. So actually day 5 in Morocco was my fastest marathon. I believe I was around 304, 306, somewhere in there. But unfortunately, being at a heavier weight and not having my body used to the impact of running anymore, I got a stress fracture that day in Morocco, and then had to run the next 2 marathons. And I say run with like air quotes, like it was a run and walk. The next 2 marathons in Dubai and the last one in Sydney, with a stress reaction in my hip, which was not the greatest experience of my career. But what was really cool was get to the finish line in Sydney, and I got to kind of go out on my own terms. So the way my running career ended, I never kind of got to say goodbye to the marathon. And, this thing that had given me so many extraordinary life experiences and had put me in touch with so many extraordinary people. And I never got to run a last one and know this is going to be the last one. And what I always wanted to do is actually something I kind of stole from wrestlers, where after they wrestle their last match, they'll put their shoes down on the mat and they'll walk away barefoot and leave them there. And it's kind of like a symbolic way to say, like, given everything I can, and now like I'm moving on into a new season of life. And so I did that in Sydney. When I got to the finish line, finally, it was like 5.5 hours later, I got there and got very gingerly, got down on my knees and took off my shoes, left them on the finish line, and walked away and never looked back. And it was a really emotional moment for me of closure. It kind of felt like someone died in some ways. It was like there was this thing that I was going after for 20 years, and I had so many amazing memories and lots of heartbreak too, but so many amazing memories and experiences. And that feeling that I like to describe, it's like you're like a cheetah just eating up the ground and feeling amazing, feeling like you're floating. Like I knew I was going to miss feeling like that, but I also knew like I couldn't go back. It's like when someone dies, it's like you can't go back and like have more time with them. So there was like kind of this grieving of being like, this thing is over, but that also kind of marked a clear end of one season and launched me into this next season where, and actually I had a lot of healing that happened inside me just by writing this book. It helped me kind of put everything in place and all the life lessons. I could kind of see how God was kind of orchestrating everything. And I was realizing that the things that I've learned about how to develop my potential as a runner, and as a human being over the last 20 years, we're not going to die with my running. Like those were going to go on with me into the next season of life. So now I'm invested in helping other people, helping other runners. I coach my wife and a couple other pro athletes here in Flagstaff. And I just want to make my ceiling where I got to in running. I want to make that the floor of my athletes. I want them to, do all the things I did right and then not do all the things I did wrong. And I want to be there just to go through the highs and lows, because there's going to be highs and lows. It's very rare to see someone that just hits it every time out. So now my focus is on that. My focus is on being a good dad, being a good father. And now with the book coming out too, I'm just really excited to share those things that I learned, and, kind of thinking about other 13-year-olds that are maybe out there and they're thinking like, what is it going to take for me to maximize my potential? But really, it doesn't matter your age. Like I just got into weightlifting at 33, and I'm curious too. It's like, how do I get better at this thing? And I'm constantly like on YouTube looking at videos and studying the sport and trying to get better. So anyone who's, I think interested in maximizing their potential in anything will hopefully find some gold nuggets to be able to take with them on their journey.
Really cool. Ryan, tell me about the nonprofit that you founded.
Yeah, thanks for asking about that. So, like I said, when I was 13, I collapsed on the couch after that big run. Felt like God told me I would run with the best guys in the world, and I'd been given that gift so I could help other people. I knew what the first part of that meant, like I'd seen the Olympics before. I know what it's like or what that means to run with the best guys in the world. What I didn't understand is how do you help other people through running, which seems like an inherently selfish endeavor where you're all about you and maximizing your own potential, But I'm really glad that I had both of those things. And it took me until 2008 to figure out how you can truly touch someone else's life through your own pursuits, and for me, through running. So my wife and I, we had partnered with Team World Vision one year for the Chicago Marathon to help, we were kind of ambassadors for them to help raise money and support and awareness for clean water in Zambia. So a group of 500 runners raised enough money to bring clean water to 90,000 people in Zambia. And after the Beijing Olympics, Sarah and I I had the pleasure of getting to go to Zambia and go to these communities way out in the sticks and do ribbon cutting ceremonies, these freshly placed boreholes that were going to bring clean water. And I'll never forget just this villager. He didn't work for like World Vision or have any agenda, but he just came up to me and standing next to me as we were watching the ribbon cutting ceremony. He said, "I am so grateful that you guys brought clean water to us." He's like, "Because you guys did this, everyone in my community, their life expectancy is going to go up by 10 years. And that just hit me so hard. I was like, whoa, that's it. Like, that's it. You can change, you can add years to 90,000 people's lives just by being a part of a group of runners at the Chicago Marathon 1 year, you know, like that just blew my socks off. So my wife and I, we went home from that trip and we started our own foundation. It's called the Hall Steps Foundation. And we continue to support World Vision and other organizations like that are working to empower those who are in poverty to rise above that and get themselves out of poverty. And so we started the Hall Steps Foundation. Anyone can run any race wherever they want. Super easy. If they just go to thestepsfoundation.org, they can sign up, join our team, and run a race and create a fundraising page. And every single dollar that's raised goes towards the projects that we're involved with. And we're involved a lot in Ethiopia now, but it's just me and Sarah running it. And of course, we don't take one penny from the foundation. So all of those money goes to those projects. And, you know, my heart just burns for people who don't have the same opportunities that I have. Being in Ethiopia, being in Addis on the streets, having a 10-year-old kid come up to you in tattered clothes and ask to shine your shoes for 5 cents. And, you know, I just look at this kid, I'm like, what hope does this kid have? Like, how is he going to get himself out of the situation? And like, miraculously, some kids do get them out of that situation, but I would say a lot of them don't. And so, you know, we just want to be a part of the solution. That's why we call it the Steps Foundation. And it goes back to like what I was talking about with consistency. It's not about like, or at least for myself, it's not about like trying to take a huge bite of something. It's about just like taking one step towards it and being a part of the solution, being one person who's taking that step. And really, like, for us to work through this world poverty, that I really think that can be reversed in our lifetime. And I don't think people have to live in extreme poverty in the world we're in today. But it's going to take all of us like getting up and doing something about it and taking our own personal steps towards loving those people around the world that don't have the same opportunities as us.
Good for you. That's incredible. Really incredible. Ryan, I want to transition because I know we're almost up on time here, and I want to ask you a little bit about your own superhuman routine. You know, someone who spent so much of their life concerned with their body and its top performance. What are some of the things that you do on a day-to-day basis as a husband, father, entrepreneur, author, athlete to ensure that you're at peak superhuman performance?
Yeah, I love the question. First off, to start, 20 ounces of water as soon as I get up. I picked that up from a nutritionist at Stanford. That's so huge to start off your day like that. Like, I know a lot of my athletes I work with, because I do some personal coaching online as well, they don't do that. And then they'll have like headaches throughout the day, or even my girls, like they'll get headaches all the time. I'm like, have you drank any water today? And they're like, no. I'm like, well, there you go. You know, like how many health things can be avoided just by us, like taking control of our hydration. So
yes,
that's how I kick the day off. I do coffee now. When I was running professionally, I would only do coffee prior to hard workouts. So I was super sensitive to it. And I tell people, like, it was definitely the most performance enhancing thing, you know, food or energy substance that I can take prior to workouts. Like, I felt like a different kind of runner when I'd have a cup of coffee before workout. So, but I would only have it those 3 times a week. Now, you know, as a dad, I have it every day, and I need to be on top of my game at all times. So, and plus I just need to relax on some of that stuff, you know, it's like not take myself so seriously. So yeah, some coffee, but I think sleep is something that I'm glad it's getting out there. Like, people are talking about it a lot more and talking about how important it is. Cause like I mentioned, how much I slept when I was running professionally. And that was something that was surprising for me as I transitioned away from running. I was like, oh, I'm probably going to need like a lot less sleep. You know, I'm not going to need like 9 to 10 hours a night. And yet that has not changed. Like, I still need like 9 hours a night. I don't have my afternoon naps anymore. That's probably largely because I have some afternoon coffee as well. But sleep is so important. Like I tell my athletes that I'm coaching, like that's when you get better. That's when you improve. And so when I have athletes that are only sleeping 4 or 5 hours a night, I'm like, we can see some growth, some improvement, but we're not going to know how good you can be off 4 or 5 hours of sleep per night. So I think sleep is just so, in my mind, it's more important than the training. So you got to protect that, and you got to make that a priority. And of course, it's good to have some balance in there. It's okay to go out and do social things on the evenings, but just making sure that you're really consciously like taking good care of yourself with your sleep. And then I'd say, the other thing is just nutrition. It's like, it totally affects like how we feel, our emotions, our energy levels, everything. It's just so important. That was another thing that didn't really change. I mean, it changed in terms of how many calories I was taking in per day, but the quality of calories didn't really change. Like I love eating healthy food. My wife and I like to tell people, like, what you eat a lot of, like, eventually you'll start craving it. So, like, if you don't like veggies or oatmeal or whatever it is, you start eating it. And eventually, if you eat it for long enough, you're going to start craving it and you're going to start wanting it. So I still eat, like, super clean. I eat a lot. I still eat, like, 6 times a day and pretty regular with that because I want even energy throughout the day. And I find if I miss a snack, between, lunch and dinner, or my energy level is not very good, so I still do those little things. And it takes a lot of planning and preparation. You got to have things that you take with you because I travel quite a bit and you got to plan ahead. But I find it's like totally worth it for me because my quality of life is just much higher when I'm on top of my sleep, on top of my nutrition. And then just consistently for me, it's now getting into my garage where I have a basic home gym and getting in there an hour a day and just busting on stuff, going super hard, and then I'm out of there in an hour and I have the rest of the day to help other people and to serve other people and be about other business.
Beautiful. Well, Ryan, we've come up on time here. I do want to ask, where can people reach out and learn more about you, get in touch with you?
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter and Instagram, Ryan Hall 3. I also have a fan page on Facebook. And then my wife and I, we have a website, ryanandsarahhall.com. So those are all good places to catch me.
Beautiful. And Ryan, before I thank you, I do want to ask you, if people take away one thing from this podcast episode and they carry it with them for the rest of their lives, what would you hope for that to be?
So what I personally am going after on a day-to-day basis, I'd love for people to also go after this because I think it'd make the world a better place, is loving God, loving yourself, and loving other people. Sometimes my life gets so complex and I just always fall back on that. Like that is the goal of my existence, is to do those 3 things well.
I love it. Ryan, such a pleasure chatting with you. I really hope your book launch goes incredibly well, and let's keep in touch.
All right. Sounds good. Yeah. Thanks for having me on, Jonathan.
All right, my friend. You take care.
All right. You too.
Thanks for tuning in to the award-winning Superhuman Academy podcast. For more great skills and strategies, or for links to any of the resources mentioned in this episode, visit superhuman.blog. While you're at it, please take a moment to share this episode with a friend and leave us a review on iTunes. We'll see you next week.